Okay, we are going to continue on with types of reasoning. And let's go right to the PowerPoint. I'm Professor Barry Brennan. This is for my public speaking class. We are discussing persuasive speaking, and we're figuring out how we put that whole argument thing together. What does that look like? And we left off talking about reasoning. So let's just find that baby right there. Okay, the process reasoning, the process of drawing conclusions from evidence, right? How do we put that together? How do we match that? Two types of reasoning. We've got deductive, and I was explaining earlier in the earlier video what deductive reasoning and what inductive reasoning. So let's kind of break those down. Deductive reasoning, general to specific. We're going to look at this as a syllogism. Now, I really like syllogisms. It might be like a geeky thing about me, but I like it. You know why? Because they're really neat. Okay, it must be the math part of me that likes some math I really like because there's only one answer. So if you're a math person, you know what I'm talking about. So it's neat. It's very neat. If you figure out how this the construction works, it's easy. And it's kind of fun. And it doesn't. Here's the thing about syllogism. It doesn't have to be true, but the construction has to be right. But what it states doesn't have to be true. The construction has to be right. When we're writing the syllogism, I'm not saying your reasoning in general, how you come up with deductive, but we're looking at the construction of how this kind of logic is constructed. So, you've got a major premise. You're going to have a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. So we're going to start with an example. All men are mortal. Then we have, notice all men. If you don't, you know who Socrates is. You must know who Socrates is because we talked about this earlier in the year. We talked about Aristotle, but I'm sure I mentioned Socrates. Socrates was Aristotle's, or Aristotle was Socrates'. What is the word I want? Kind of like, not assistant, but someone that he mentored. So Socrates was Aristotle's mentor. There's a better word for that, but I can't think of what it is. So all men are mortal, major premise. Minor premise, Socrates is a man. Now, I'm going to have you think about this in a certain way. If we were in class, I would draw a circle. And that big circle is all men are mortal. Okay? The big circle is all men. And there's mortal within it. Circle of mortality. You with me? Now, in that, Socrates is a man. So if Socrates is a man and he's in that big man part, I might have just told you this the wrong way. Let me think about this a minute. Yeah, I just told you the wrong way. Let's go back. Nixie. Okay, mortality is the big circle. And in the mortality, there's men. Okay, this is why it's going to make sense. Mortality is a big circle. In the smaller circle is men. Men are mortal. They're in the big circle of mortality. And inside the smaller circle in men is Socrates. Okay, you with me? Socrates is the tinier circle and the bigger circle and the larger circle. So what can you conclude from that? Think about it. What's the conclusion? If all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, we know that Socrates is mortal. If you're having trouble with writing these syllogisms, I'm going to tell you right now, what you want to do is you want to do my test. Okay? Let's just do another one before I even go to the next slide. All cats can fly. Okay? The big circle is all things that fly. Right? Now, I've labeled, we're talking about the cats in the big circle of things that fly. Cats are in that circle. Notice how it's not true. Because we're talking about the construction. We're not talking about the truth. So, there's things that fly, and inside there are cats. Okay? Now, in order for this to work, because my minor premise has to be part of this little circle within the big circle. Okay? So I say Felix is a cat. So Felix is now in the small circle, right? In the small circle within the bigger circle of things that fly. If I were to say Felix is a bird, it doesn't work, because the minor premise has to be part of the major premise. There has to be a piece in the minor premise that connects to the major premise. And it wouldn't make sense. Let's just say we do that. All cats can fly. So we've got the big circle, and there's a little circle in there that says cats, right? That are full of cats. And I say Felix is a bird. Well, suddenly it doesn't even matter. We know that, and then we say Felix can fly. It doesn't make sense, because if we're saying things that fly and cats are in there and Felix is a bird, we have to say that birds fly first in order for it to be part of that story. Okay, so don't get lost in what is the truth. Focus on what the actual syllogism, the whole syllogism. Let's give you another example before we go to the next thing. So, all cats can fly. Cats are in there. And then I say, let's say this. Torty can fly. So that's my conclusion. The conclusion is Torty can fly. Well, what is the minor premise? Torty is a cat, right? Not Torty is a bird. You can't bring birds into it if you haven't talked about it in the major premise. Whatever is the major premise decides what the boundaries are, okay? What can be discussed. In the minor premise, you can bring something that's related that will fit into the major premise, but in the conclusion sums it all up. I hope I'm not confusing you. It makes sense to me, but if you're a visual person, you can think of this in the circle, a small circle within it, and when that smaller circle has to be that detail. Okay, syllogism, major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. Now, you cannot figure out, you're going to need two of these to figure out one of them. Most cases, you're going to need the major premise and either the conclusion or the minor premise to figure either one of those out. Okay? I'm not sure, it would be hard to write it to be certain of if you wrote the minor premise and the conclusion without knowing what the major premise is. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it would be difficult. Let's move on. Actually, I think it might be really difficult. Inductive reasoning. So specific to general. So notice the deductive was general to specific. And if you think about that syllogism, it was general, and then the minor premise was specific, right? Something, all men are mortal. That was a general statement. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. So the minor and the conclusion are specific things, but the major premise is that overall generalization. Inductive reasoning, when we do inductive reasoning, we're going specific to general. What we know about one particular thing that we can say, oh, that's something that's a constant occurrence, or we could generalize. Let's look at what I mean. So speaker emphasizes conclusions that is inferred, but not always factual, true or factual. Okay, you can infer that, I'm trying to think of what we infer. How about this? You go to Yosemite and those of you, you're from here, you know Yosemite. You go to Yosemite and you left food in your car and you go on a hike and you come back and your car's broken into and there's food all over your car. What do you infer? Well, you infer that it's bears. Why? Because you know that bears break into cars and steal food. Probably not a human being did that, but a bear probably did it. Now, is it true or factual? Can you prove it? No, but it's actually good inference, right? Because of what you know about bears and what you know about that area. All right, moving on. Another way to do this, a form of inductive reasoning, is analogy. So analogy compares two similar cases or instances and implies one is true. If one is true, then the other must be true. So let's take the bear example. So I wonder if that's an analogy or not. But let's just say it. Let's say that, and it doesn't mean that that doesn't necessarily always mean. Some people draw analogies between animals. Let's just say that people do this often with wolves. They'll assume because a mountain lion attacked a person, wolves attack people because they're both predators. That's inductive reasoning. The truth is, wolves, most predators, they stay away from people, and most predators don't attack people. That is more a rare occurrence. You're more likely to be in car accidents than you are to get attacked by an animal in the wild. And that's because they don't want to be around you. You're not part of their world, and you don't taste good to them anyway. And in fact, most of them, if they were to attack a human, there has probably been an instance where they ate the human, but that's probably unusual. So people will draw an analogy because one predator attacks and the other must attack when they're not. Or there might be similar cases of what looks like a wolf attack, so that means that something else looks the same, like if a calf got attacked, that it must be the same wolf pack. That's drawn an analogy. Doesn't mean it's true. Okay, where are we at now? To convince audience members of this line of reasoning, they must have prior exposure. Remember what prior exposure is? I'm pretty sure we've talked about this already. Prior exposure means they have to be on the same page as you. This is something they have to have lived with. One of the problems, let's talk about wolves for a minute. One of the problems that people in mountain communities where there are wolves, we're talking way up north in this country, like Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, where there are wolves, and there are people like me who live in California who's never lived around a wolf, is that we don't have any prior exposure to being a rancher. If you're not a rancher or if you live in the city, especially urban people, you don't have any experience with having cattle being attacked by anything, whatever it is. I mean, the truth is about that is cattle are less attacked and more die from disease and other problems. But there's no prior exposure with that. Okay, so that's why when people from an urban environment try to argue for the conservation of certain predators, we get laughed off. We get laughed at because what do we know? But if you're to make that argument with people that actually live and have had exposure in that experience, that's why the argument's so strong. That's why inductive reasoning works, because they've been there, they've had that experience. So think about that if you're trying to do that in your persuasive speech. For example, COVID. Now, nobody's going to be given a speech about COVID, but all of us have experienced it. We all have had prior exposure to isolation, fear of getting sick, fear of dying, fear of our parents dying or our loved ones dying or getting sick or not having a job. All those things. All of us had prior exposure to that. I think next we're on to fallacies. Let's see. Causal reasoning, and then we're going to stop. So causal reasoning is one event, circumstance, or idea is the cause of another. Right? That's neither wrong nor right. You just have to find the evidence. This was told to us, September 11th is the reason for establishing the Patriot Act. There's a causal link between those two. That's inference that the government made. A lot of you probably weren't even alive then, but that did happen. Okay, I think we're into fallacies now. Okay, this is all the discussion board. See that assignment? And I'm going to pick this up next. We're going to be talking about fallacies in this next video. I'll see you then.